It's an interesting question to be asked to introduce myself because at this midlife stage where I'm at, I'm in some ways I'm less interested in what has gone behind me, even though all of that has made where I'm at possible, right? So, I mean, I've basically been a writer my whole life. I have journals starting from the age of 7, and I have this third grade essay that is hilarious because I said, I want to be an authoress. And so it's been the single defining passion, dream, desire, and focus of my whole life. So, like, it's career, yes, but it's essential identity more than anything. So, and I have spent I always say I was on a stumble and bumble my path to success. That was my path because everything I did was like, yeah, I'll do this volunteer literary radio show where I get to interview Louise Erdrich, Pulitzer Prize winner. Sure. And then, oh, maybe Writer's Digest magazine would be interested in that interview. Things like that, where I've done a lot of just like saying yes to stuff that then I was able to parlay into something success, like it looks like success. But so I am the author of soon to be 7 books on the craft of writing. And all of that came about because I was editing as like a young editor through just like a service, and I was seeing certain things crop up over and over and over again. And I was an avid reader. As a young editor, I was seeing these things crop up, and I thought, you know what? I haven't seen a craft book on this topic, which was my book Make a Scene. And I was writing for Writer's Digest magazine. I asked my editor, who's the book editor? I wrote a book proposal in a weekend, the whole weekend, and I sold that book at a time before this phrase platform came along where you had to be somebody because there was no social media. So I'm old enough to be pre-social media. So because of that, that opened a door into a career where I teach writing, edit manuscripts, and do writing coaching. All of that while at the same time I was writing these novels behind the scenes that didn't get published for a very long time. At one point, I had Gillian Flynn's agent. She's the one who wrote Gone Girl, right before that book published. I've had all of these like near hits, close successes, and most of my work I have sold myself directly to the publisher and almost exclusively small presses. Um, at a time in my life that would have seemed like not success. Now that seems like that's exactly the way I want to do it. I'm not saying if like the big 5 came knocking and we're like, hey, we have this money we want to hand you, that I would necessarily ignore that, but I'm not chasing it anymore. So my success now, or my career is built on, I love writing about writing craft because it's basically getting paid to do, to be an English class. I'm reading, I'm analyzing, I'm breaking down stuff and sort of putting it into a way I hope is digestible for people. And then I have also written a lot of essays, and I'm a journalist for my day job. I work as a journalist in personal finance, of all things. But I've written a wide spectrum of articles and essays about everything from human behavior to science. I wrote for Mental Floss for a number of years, writing about, like new drug studies and the science of fear and things like that. So, but at my heart, at my core, I think I'm a fiction writer, I'm a novelist, and I'm discovering that I really love writing a particular kind of nonfiction that is like analysis, like it's like taking the work of others and interfacing it with my own analysis. Looks like I published a bunch of books back to back, but I actually didn't. What happened is I had published 2 novels prior, years ago, almost 10 and 15 years ago. The first one was Forged in Grace, and then I published one called Women in Red. And a variety of things happened with the publishers of those situations. And so they went out, not really actually weren't out of print per se, but I was able to get the rights back. And so they were republished by something called Sibylline Press, which is a press publishing women 50 and older. And at the same time, within the time, like I had already signed a deal with Running Wild Press, actually at the end of 2022, to put my sort of psychological thriller or eco thriller Fallout to be published. And their catalog was just so packed that she was like, I don't think this is going to be able to come out until 2025. So it was just interesting timing, let's put it that way. So but it's funny because also I've learned it is hell to promote more than one book at once. I don't recommend it.
It,
And so, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. The one of the first people I had on this podcast had two books that came out at the same time, and they were both literary, like really intense, like experimental fiction. And we tried to like put it in the same podcast. I think we managed to do it okay, but it was a long episode.
I think, the book freshest in my mind is Fallout because that was the newest book, even though I started that book over 10 years ago. But the way the journey of a writer goes, right? You work on something, you come and go from it. I really reinvigorated my work on that during the pandemic, the lockdown phase of the pandemic, the early days, which I guess you could technically say we're still in. But the worst of it when we all felt like, will we ever leave our homes again? I do not know. So I needed something to put myself into because I had lost a bunch of my work and was lonely and bored. Actually love all my books, even though I can see how different I am from who I was when I was writing them. And I'm also at this time, as we speak, working on a book about writing through midlife, like women and femmes and non-binary folks, like going through how do we relate to our creativity and our writing at midlife. So the person who wrote those other books was younger, a lot younger, a new mom or newer mom in some cases. And with Fallout, I started out being, I think my son was 6, and I finished it when he was 16, or it came out, or it's coming out when he's 16. So like, I started it when I was in my early 40s, and now I'm almost 51.
The age of women is really a lot on my mind reading Fallout. Like I was just so impressed with sort of, and this is, I was like, how do you say this in a way that doesn't sound like binders full of women, but it's like the variety of like women characters that happen
Yeah.
and are robust in the book. Like there's not a side character who's a woman
Mm.
in, not really. I mean, I guess there are a couple little ones,
Mhm.
but they're categorized. They don't really have like names, like it's very clear like this is a person doing a thing in this scene, and we don't need to go any deeper than that. But a character that's not that different from that person is more robustly explored.
My husband's a psychologist and very like pro woman, but he was saying this like lovingly, but he's like, there's really no likable men in this book. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't trying to not make men likable, but I was trying to make it woman heavy, woman centric, woman heavy. And even in the sense that women are capable of not, I don't want to go with like, oh, they are capable of evil, but like the idea is that like everyone can be morally gray, right? And that or everybody has that capacity and that women are, yeah, can be, we're not all heroes, we're also messy, complicated people, but I did want it to be women centric. And in fact, in the original draft, the sort of eco-anarchists were a group of men and women, and it was actually a friend of mine who she just said it like on an offhand. She's like, wouldn't it be cool if they were like all women and it was like blah, the like I just had an epiphany and I saw it in my head so clearly at that moment. And if you look at a lot of activist groups are driven by women, and it's so, I'm not saying there are not a lot of great men in the work, there are plenty, but there are so many of those groups are really driven and women heavy, and I do include in my definition, I have a very wide and expansive idea of what, even though the book itself doesn't talk about a gender spectrum, I really do include in women, women, trans women, non-binary folks, people who are femme presenting. Like, I just want to be really clear that I have a very open definition of that. Anyone who feels they encounter the world or the world encounters them and applies like feminine qualities to them. I'm sure even some gay men would feel that way. But so I don't know if I'm really answering any question you posed. I'm just kind of meandering. I appreciate it that it's so hard to see your work as a writer. You can't see it until it's out, and then you interact with it all fresh again when other people are telling you what they saw in it, right? I was worried too because Zoe's character is she's rich and wealthy and white, and that's on purpose, and I wanted to show her complicity. I wanted to show everyone's complicity in things. In this case, sort of around the idea of, it's not really, it's around the idea of climate and climate activism, but it's really more about like power, how power abuses and oppresses all the good things in the world, including the earth and women and children and things like that. But I did worry that like, who wants to read about this rich white lady having her come to Jesus moment, right? But it's also, I feel like all fiction is fantasy. And so it's like I'm writing the story I want to exist, even though I know in some ways a story arc like hers is hard to believe. Not maybe hers in particular is believable, but like in real life, we don't see that many people reckon with their own complicity and then change, right? Things. Partly the reason I gave her a difficult past is so I could relate to her because I was like, I don't know how to relate to this woman otherwise. And I thought I could understand someone who once they got a taste of wealth and comfort, that's like you don't want to give that up, right? You're going to dig in and hold on to that. So then it was like, well, what would it take to shake her free from that? But I also wanted to show that like she wasn't really happy, right? She wasn't really happy. She probably was happy in the beginning, and then her daughter's gone off to college. She's kind of in that midlife phase, which I'm now entering, where you start to question everything anyways, like the physiological changes, the psychological and emotional changes, and then of course the story catalyst of Justine's actions drives her. But I also so I mean I'm not like an expert on eco-anarchism, and I very consciously stayed away except for when they're being criticized from calling them eco-terrorists, even though some of their prior behavior could certainly be described as terrorism. Partly because I feel like when, again, this morally gray line, right? When people are fighting for something of like when people who are not in a position of power ultimately are fighting for the sort of the just cause, sometimes they have to go to extremes, right? To get noticed, seen, or make an impact. And so like and you have to walk a careful line when you talk about that because you don't want to say that terrorism is the answer or violence is the answer. And of course you see in the book they move away from that as an answer, even though that also might not be realistic in the world we live in. But I did struggle with, I guess I just wanted to present the idea that sometimes you have to get attention, the downtrodden, as one of the characters calls them, have to rise up in ways that will get attention. But it's not like I'm out here trying to promote eco-terrorism. And I also think a lot of the people doing the work, there is true eco-anarchism, don't all resort to violence. In fact, a lot of them put their own bodies on the line.
I love reading anything that's eco literary in any way right now because to me that's like the only opportunity is like seeing how other people deal with it. It's like the only opportunity for us to even imagine how to deal with it differently. And because I think that you're right. I mean, because like I'm from the Florida Panhandle, which doesn't show up in the news where I live now in Seattle, or anywhere that I've ever lived except for the Florida Panhandle, but gets hit by hurricanes pretty much every year. And so the community has to come together the same way that in Los Angeles when the fires happened. But what I find really interesting about that is that one, there were two hurricanes that hit North Carolina and Tennessee right before the wildfires happened. And the news was quote unquote saturated with stories within 3 days. Like no editors were taking any pitches about the whole communities, the hollers that were like flooded, people were missing, children died. Nobody knows about it. Nobody will publish anything about it. Nobody gives a fuck, but we're still seeing stuff about the wildfires. And so like we really privilege like affluent communities and will they drive us to change? I don't think so because I lived in Florida for 20 years and left because it is the most like we are fucked with regards to water. We are so fucked. We are going to be thirsty so soon. Florida is like the epicenter of like all the things we could do to change but don't. There are like more critters in Florida than anywhere else in the United States that are just dying and dying and dying and dying. And we have this like beautiful state park system that we are destroying regularly and have been for 50 years. So it's like, will these disasters bring, like, I don't even have the hope that you have. I mean, I find it hilarious because we're just all going to die together. We're going to boil and dehydrate at the same
You
time.
know, I don't have what I would call hope in a big way. I don't have hope for a rescue anymore. I don't have hope. What I have hope for, I don't even know if I'd call it hope. I feel like the place where how do I even put this? Like the women of Project Nemesis in my book. I think we're going to get hyper local community kind of mutual aid based support. Like yeah, we are all going to die and a lot of people are going to suffer, and the people who suffer will be the most marginalized people already, right? So people, low income people, people of color who are, bearing the burdens. Um, but community based stuff is going to be where it's at, and it's what you do have and what does matter will, I think, be at that level. And that means in some communities where you've got the gated communities and the people, and it's going to be shitty. Like I didn't want to, I wanted to make sure there wasn't any seemingly white savior shit in the book. So there is a scene where they go to basically a set of apartments that are built like downwind of some kind of effluence or chemical effluence plant. I forget what I forget my own book. And people, and it has this stench, and and they're like, "Ooh, nobody lives here, right?" No. And Hecate's like, "Oh yeah, they live here and they play outside, and you have been kind of conveniently separated from what it looks like to live in communities that have been intentionally left to basically rot in these places." So, and that's what I see Project Nemesis. I see them becoming more of a mutual aid group by the end of the book than a eco-anarchist group. Like I think they actually kind of realize that themselves, that they're not going to make change at that level either, which is why I didn't come up with a big, Deus Ex Machina ending where, like, I still think the villain gets his comeuppance, but he doesn't get it the way I would have in like an ideal world where I would have loved to have him be. I'm not going to say too much, but like it's there, but it isn't what it could have been in my mind because I was trying to stay within the slightest realm of realism, right?
I was thinking about the psychological thriller genre, which admittedly, like, I was like, have I ever read a psychological thriller before? Like, I don't know if I have, and so I'm not used to it. I think that kind of made it better for me because I'm just like, I don't know what to expect. This is like, and it's like, it is like thrilling. Like, I understand what they say, like, it's a page turner. It's like at every point there is like a, what's next? And I'm interested in, anything that you have to say about the genre, but also in this idea of putting what you're talking about, like kind of like a move toward a more realistic ending inside of that genre.
That's a good question. I like that. I mean, I will tell you that I don't write to the constraints of the genre the way a lot of writers do. Like other thriller and psychological suspense writers would probably be like raising their eyebrows at me as to whether or not I qualify. Like I'm a big fan of Megan Abbott. Have you read her at all? She's like psychological suspense or thriller to the nines. Like she's amazing, and she makes you so nervous on every page. But anyways, I think part of it is that I've taught writing crap for so long that I can't entirely write without it in the back of my mind. So there's a little bit of that. But so here's something that's been happening to me lately, and it definitely was happening when I was really writing the end of that book. That was like the beginning, is that I've gotten tired of the sameness of the formula of things, even as I like aspects of it. And so I love psychological suspense, but I think readers, especially readers who read a lot, they kind of know what to expect. They know what's going to come, or they know how it's going to turn, or how it's going to twist. They don't know the twist, but they know there will be a twist, right? And I guess for me, I'm just less interested in that. It doesn't feel fresh. It doesn't feel true to where I'm at in my life. And there just the reality of all the possible big, like Hollywood movie endings that I could have given it just wouldn't feel true to the character. Like I felt like I would be betraying the characters who are real, who are many of them realists, like especially the women of Nemesis. Like they do not, you know, what is it, suffer fools. They do not, and even Justine, by the end of the book, though, she starts out in what I would consider kind of a fugue state where she is not herself, or, she's not even fully a human. I think in the beginning, she, by the end, has come back down to reality. And then Zoe has like gone back to, it's like she's also gone back to a reality that maybe she tried to push behind. So for me, it was all about like, can we get to the end, and can it feel plausible but also satisfying? I call everything I write psychological suspense because it's easy, and because it is, I'm interested in the messy underbelly and secrets and things people don't tell each other, and that end up getting them in trouble, right? So like all the things that the two main characters of that story, Grace and Marly, have not spoken aloud to each other, ultimately kind of become their downfall or something in the end, by the end, and potentially their redemption. But I almost never, and very rarely, have had like a character just like whisper in my ear and then I had to write their story. Like almost never. That character, Grace, I was actually in a little cabin. It was the weekend I wrote the proposal for Make a Scene, interestingly. So my good friend Becca Lawton, she's an incredible writer, and she and I had done like just a self-led retreat. We both had projects we were working on at this gorgeous little retreat center where they like, made the food out of their own garden up in near Mendocino, California. And we went up there, and you had to make your own fire, and if you wanted heat you had to make your own fire in the room. And so I was like, and I'm not good at it. And so it took me like a whole 24 hours to like really get one going where I could keep it going. And then in the morning, I'd just poke it and it would come back to life. And I felt so proud. I don't know. So as I was sitting there poking the embers, like this character, just Grace, spoke in my ear about, and she like gave me a monologue. Like it just came out of her. And I don't even know if that still made it into the book. So I wrote, and I don't know. I think, okay, the other thing is I'm always have been fascinated by young friendship and the ways in which it can be like obsession, and that obsession can be like practice, or not even just obsession, but that intensity can be like practice for adult and later love relationships. Like I feel like we learn a lot, and I don't know enough, even having watched my son and his friends, it seems to me that people who are assigned female at birth or identify as girls, so I don't want to speak for everyone here, just my experience as a girl, like the girls do that a lot, right? Like they do a lot of this like intense friendshiping, but it may be true across other genders. So I'm just saying, I was just kind of in love with this idea of the obsession that's possible with friends and how it borders almost the romantic or the erotic, right? So um, so I think those things just kind of converged in my head and birthed Grace first, um, and so there are also like Marly is, it's funny because Marly, the character of Marly, is like an amalgam of all of these women that I've been drawn to over my lifetime. Not just friends, but like other figures in my life, and who have these big personalities, a lot of damage, but like you cannot be, you're sucked into their orbit. They're charismatic, they're brilliant, but you also like you can't not be taken in by them, but at the same time there's a party that's like, I should probably put some boundaries up, but I don't know how. So she's kind of like an amalgam of all those people. So I think it was born out of those two places, I'd say. um the rest was discovery, I think, writing the discovery.
The way that you draw these characters is so compassionate. You can see their heart and you can see who they are, and that it's just a struggle. And, with a lot of results sometimes, but just a struggle in action, but also metaphorically, how Grace, is kind of carrying, the actual scars and like metaphorical scars of her past. And that leads her to be like a kind of conflicted healer. And I feel like that is just sort of it's like the codependent daughters journey. It's like I've always believed that the hero's journey is the journey of a man, and that women have all these other journeys that are really, really different from the hero's journey. Like it's not always about going away from home and coming back changed. I think sometimes you are changed by your home
Oh,
and then
yes.
go out into the world and have to deal with what happened at home. I'm just so interested because it's such a like a distilled to me journey from like the trauma and pain of like a childhood or to helping others and trying to contend with what that actually means and like is it real, am I actually helping,
Yeah.
am I actually healing, does it have anything to do with me at all? I mean those questions are, I mean, very resonant for me.
I do think I am a little obsessed with stories of trying to heal what might be what might be difficult to fully heal or heal in a straight line. Not, I don't think healing ever goes in a straight line. And there in every book I've written, I all of my stories have a so my mentor in graduate school said all my short stories could be put in a collection called Bad Mothers and Absent Fathers. Um, and my mother is not a bad mother, but my father was technically not absent either. Like he was there, but but so the themes of our life, you're right, continually find their way into our work. I think we can't not process them over and over again. So at the time I was writing Grace, I think that was pre-Al-Anon, so I had not done a lot of my own healing work. And yes, I am a recovering codependent, 100%. I didn't want the anti-vax crowd or the natural healing crowd to come in and read my book, Fortune and Grace, as an allegory for natural healing over science. That was my fear because she has the ability to make some physical healing changes. And so that's why, her form her doctor, buddy, we'll just say buddy, I needed him to have her ask that series of questions at the end that kind of calls into question how much did she really do? How much did people heal themselves? And I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't talking about something, I wasn't trying to empower a set of people to be like, yeah, see, like I was trying to say, there's so much we don't know about healing, physically, emotionally, both psychically, that and there's so much, and yes, it's also a metaphor, right? Like obviously I believe that there have been people throughout history maybe who could heal with their hands, but mostly I think we just don't fully understand the power of our own capacity to heal. And so much like, science is only, I feel like we've only scratched the surface. I needed Grace to understand people's actions too. Like I needed her to understand her father's choices. I needed her to understand her mother's background. I needed her to understand Marly even more deeply, and even though there was an ugly truth tied inside there. And I needed her also to be okay as she was by the end. Like I really didn't want her to change physically in any way, even though a part of her might have still wanted to, and I had to work, the time I started this book, we weren't talking about ableism very well. So when I rewrote it, I just went over it again when Sibylline was publishing it. I wanted to make sure I can't say, someone could call me out on ableism if they saw it fit, and I would, but I did speak with a burn survivor and have her read it, but that doesn't mean anything. Um, my point is that I wanted to make sure that a lot of those tropes were like, I was leaving them as much behind as possible. And it's funny because even the original um, woman who kind of helps her heal at one point, or she has a healing session with, was modeled after someone I knew who was herself Native American. And I had left that in the book because that was just who she was. And then I was like, oh, can't leave that in anymore. Looks like, the mystical Native American. But I was just doing that as an homage to this woman who had helped me heal. So I took that out and made sure she was just a person, not a mystical person. But like healers abound in the sense that the people who have actually helped me heal are some of the most unlikely people. Even in a book where I want people to heal, I want there to be this understanding that nothing is perfect. There's no perfect healing. We don't just get over things. We sort of incorporate them. We learn to live around them. We modify, whatever, how they, so I never want to write like a story that ties everything up in a bow. That feels really yucko to me, but and I was like, there's a question mark in my head. Will Marly become the person she wants to become for Grace? She lays out what she wants to be. Is she capable? I don't even know, to be honest. I kind of leave that up to the reader.